You know what I hate? Monopolies. Goddamn Pringles looking son of a bitch. Monopolies are bad, especially for consumers, like people who consume video games. But you know what I hate even more than monopolies? Microsoft. Not to go on one of my classic communistic rants, but Microsoft slowly blobbing out and becoming far and away the biggest producer, licensor, owner, or whatever of video games is an inherently bad thing for the people that use video games for fun and not for making shitloads of money, no matter how good you think the Xbox Game Pass deal is. Regardless, the worst thing about Microsoft is that they only care for making shitloads of money. Obviously only in the short term by cutting people's jobs, because they sure do have a penchant for shutting down game studios to consolidate, or whatever other corpo jargon they want to use as an excuse to line the pockets of their executives and shareholders a little more. And that's exactly what they did to Tango Gameworks, the studio that made Hi-Fi Rush, which is what this video is actually about, which you probably could have figured out by the title, so I'm going to start talking about that before this turns into a rant about Microsoft, but hey, maybe a video for another day. Anyway, this is Hi-Fi Rush, a rhythm-based action-adventure beat-em-up game that came out at the start of last year. A game that I'd seen and heard a few things about, namely that it was pretty fucking good and criminally underrated. And more recently I've been watching my partner play it, who suggested that I should give it a go too, and I'm very glad that I did, because this is some seriously good shit. Hi-Fi Rush is very much of the easy to learn and difficult to master vein to a very satisfying degree. Along with characters and writing that are actually interesting and a banging soundtrack to boot, this is a game that I honestly didn't expect to enjoy as much as I did because it's not a funny map game or something, but it got me hyped as all hell. Obviously, before I get any further into this video, I will need to mention that it will inherently contain some minor spoilers, so if maintaining the sanctity of the story is important to you, go buy the game now and then come back to this video later to agree with everything I said like a true Davo.com fan, or come back to hate watch it because you have no taste and are a little bitch. So to give you time to leave, I'm just gonna vent more about my favorite game company, Microsoft. Or should I say, Microcock, am I right gamers? Xbox Game Pass? Kiss my Xbox Game ass! Alright, I've taken my Ritalin now. Let's get into the video. If it wasn't already obvious, the shtick of this game is that it is driven by music. Everything is synced to the beat, and I mean everything. The combat, the enemies, the environment, even the character animations are. Having everything synced to the beat is simple, yet genius, particularly for the combat. One of the issues I have with a lot of action RPG games is it often feels like you're just mindlessly button mashing, whereas this game will directly punish you for it. Your combat arsenal is made up of combos of different mixtures of light and heavy attacks, requiring different timings to land properly. The more diverse the amount of combos you use, the more score you rack up, and the better you time them, the more damage you do. Initially, I kinda was button mashing, only using a basic light attack combo, but once you unlock more of the combos and start to dabble and eventually master them, it is deadly satisfying, and that dopamine hit from getting closer and closer to S rank was like crack. You also have companions you can call in during combat that you'll unlock as you progress through the story, each of them having abilities like breaking shields or force fields or for staggering enemies, adding a tactical edge to combat, further embellishing that anti-button mash theme. Companions can also be called in for landing specific attack combos to help reach a higher score or rack up more damage, and to be able to open or activate certain areas of the map outside of combat too, and it's nice that they actually feel helpful rather than just being kinda there for one specific use. Most of the game's 12 stages are laid out with specific action zones known as choruses, generally arena fights with regular enemies or a boss fight at the end of the stage. For each you'll be ranked on your performance, making up your overall stage rank, all broken up by stage traversal, including a fair amount of 3D platforming. Think kinda like Doom Eternal, but the platforming isn't mind-numbingly shit. Even traversing the stage is enjoyable. Dashing and jumping can be timed to the beat, making running through these platforming sections just that bit more satisfying, while also still pacing the stage and giving players a break from the action. That, and it's actually somewhat challenging at times and utilizes both your companions and the beat to keep it engaging. Your companion 808 flashing in time with the beat, as well as the environment being in sync with it too, also gives you a visual guide to help you recenter your focus and get your timing back in rhythm, along with the audio aid of the soundtrack. Well, everything except for these specific blinking lights, which are kind of on beat but not really. I don't know why the fuck they don't, but I digress. That, and it helps you figure out when to parry or dodge enemy attacks as they also move and attack to the beat. perfect, and I found that even listening to some of the boss fight tracks outside of the game genuinely helped with those fights because you could time your dodges and parries better with the music, which also scratched a nice little itch in my brain. As I said, this is one of those games that feels very satisfying to master, further enhanced by unlocking new combos and abilities as you progress, as well as being able to use ability chips to cater to your playstyle and give buffs to your companions, or things like health boosts or gaining more charge for special attacks. If I have to stop deep-throating the game for a second to sound at least a little impartial, I suppose I did find the lack of boss fights throughout the middle stretch of the game to be a little jarring, especially after having one on the first and second stages, and then not having another proper boss fight until well into the second half of the game. Quick time events also make quite a lot of appearances in a number of places, activating certain objects in stages, during cutscenes, as well as during combat and boss fights. I'm not really the biggest fan of QTEs, more so because they're just often implemented lazily or detached from actual engagement, but I do like the way this game implements them. I especially like the QTEs for finishing off bigger enemies, because they feel like they have higher stakes and because they're satisfying to master. Some of them are much more fucky than others, so once you have the fucky ones down pat, you really feel like a true gamer. The rhythm sequences I can honestly take or leave, but they're certainly far from the worst QTEs in gaming. Honestly, another thing that I was a little disappointed with initially was how short the game was, Steam saying it only took me 11 hours to get through it on my first playthrough, and I was spending a fair bit of time backtracking and exploring for extra goodies. Though in fairness, I got a pretty good intro to the game watching my partner play it, so I already knew a good chunk of the core mechanics and an appreciation for the mastery of them. Not that it didn't mean the game didn't kick my ass a few times, mostly because I kinda suck ass at video games that aren't ones about painting a map your colour, and even then. And this is very much a game that is designed to be played more than once. The scoring mechanics as well as that feeling of mastery really push you on to go back through and go for a better score on a harder difficulty. Along with certain areas of the map being locked behind obstacles that you need companions unlocked later in the game to get past, as well as a bunch of content being hidden in the post-game, really, the first playthrough is just the introduction. The second playthrough is when the game truly starts to click. Alright, so this is obviously where the bulk of the minor spoilers will be, but I won't give away much in regards to the storyline, even though it's probably not the game's strongest point. That's not to say that it's bad, certainly as far as video game narratives go, rather that the game doesn't take itself terribly seriously. At its core, it's an anti-capitalist and anti-big corporation themed story, and actually, yeah, all of a sudden it's making more and more sense why Microsoft shut this studio down. The narrative does more than enough to be satisfying. There's no enormous plot twist, nor is it overbearing, which is good because the gameplay and aesthetics are definitely the game's strong points, but it does give enough context to both the dialogue and the gameplay progression. But the strongest point of this game's writing is its characters and how they bounce off each other. The cast in this game, both friends and foes, is great. And that's not to say that some of the characters aren't insufferable or almost comically unlikable, particularly the ones that you come up against, but that certainly fits with the whole anti-corporate vibe the game has and what being a soulless corpo fuck does to people and how it makes them behave. Or, I guess, bad people bad or whatever. The playable protagonist, Chai, is kind of a dickhead, but he comes around to not being such a dickhead in the end, but that's also kind of the point. He's a misfit, as are all of the squad you build up, and sometimes it's easier to relate to a rabble of oddballs than a perfectly sculpted protagonist with a 10-inch cock and a 10-year Mew streak. But my favourite character is the main antagonist, Kale. He is simultaneously this oral figurehead, yet just an egotistical, spoiled brat. And Roger Craig Smith's delivery absolutely hits it out of the park. My favourite jokes and lines in this game are delivered by him, and even though he is a massive fuckface, I can't help but love his characterization. Something I love about this game that I wish more games did is using a whole host of different accents for characters rather than everyone just having a generic West Coast American accent, especially when there's other Anglosphere accents in there. Except for Australian, which is bullshit. Like, come on, they even have a New Zealander in there. Oh yeah, sure, cause I love finance and also fosh and chops, let's watch the rugby brew. Hi-Fi Rush has set a new standard for me. Video games must have a Scottish baddie in them for me to consider buying. So I'm gonna need some suggestions for games to review, or this channel might be deader than it already is. There's nothing worse than games that are goofy in nature but aren't funny. Fortunately for Hi-Fi Rush, it's pretty clever with its comedy. It's fun watching the diverse cast of characters interact with each other, both the protagonists, the robots you encounter, and even the antagonists arguing amongst themselves. The game is fond of screw the audience jokes, which I'm very partial to, and tying a lot of its humour into its overarching anti-corporation theme makes it hit a little too close to home at times, but it was enough to actually make me laugh out loud a number of times. Or at least that little nose exhale you do when nobody else is around. Like... you know what I mean. And look, it has a few painfully on the nose referential moments and supremely cringy gags or dialogue tidbits, but overall the character writing and dialogue was yet another thing that this game got right. Look, no point in fucking around with this part. Aesthetically, Hi-Fi Rush is a masterclass. Obviously the music and sound design is the primary focus, and there is essentially no area that it gets it wrong. Music is so much more important in games than many people give it credit for. It's not only about being good to put on a Spotify playlist, it's about embellishing what is happening on the screen and setting an atmosphere, and the soundtrack in Hi-Fi Rush does exactly that. Immediately, the game throws Lonely Boy at you in the intro, which I'm already hyped at that point. Launching into a level with Invaders Must Die blaring in the background while you fight a huge army of robots is as close to as hype as you can get in a video game. And Free Radicals also has to be easily one of my favourite boss fight tracks of all time. The soundtrack is obviously killer in this game, because I mean if it wasn't, the entire premise of it would be unraveled, but at no point does it disappoint, either in the licensed music or the original tracks made for it. It's also worth noting that the game does have a streamer mode, which replaces licensed tracks with original songs that essentially sound quite similar, but also prevent you from getting insta-DMCA'd on Twitch or whatever, so as a content creator, I can appreciate that. I'll be the first to admit that I'm biased, because my music taste is painfully indie millennial despite not being one, but this is a masterclass in not only composing a sick OST, but using it to really enhance the atmosphere and feeling of the game. And it's not just the music, it's the little things like the crowd cheering when you time an attack or dodge perfectly that make even the basic parts of the gameplay that much more satisfying. And despite the sound design obviously being the crux of the game, visually it's fantastic as well. I love the 3D cel-shaded design, which not only looks good but is also visually clear and makes Chai and enemies pop out of the detailed and moving backgrounds, as well as also not being stupidly resource intensive and not an art style that's ever gonna age badly. The cinematics are great as well, all animated fluidly and certainly not skip worthy, and I really enjoy those moments where the game switches to the hand-drawn style or comic style stills in some of the cutscenes as well. I love that not only is the environment synced up to the music, but also the way Chai snaps his fingers to the beat when standing still and how his footsteps match it too. It all makes you appreciate the visual design that much more, while also helping you get a feel for the game. Another little thing that I really liked was the mural in the hideout that slowly fills out as you complete more objectives and achievements. Definitely showing that this is a game for the 100%ers out there, but it was really nice to have that visual representation of your progress and mastery of the game. One of my only gripes with the game being synced to the music is that it recommends that you play the game in 60Hz to ensure that everything stays in sync, which as a hardcore gamer, that goes against every fibre of my being, as anything below 144Hz is literally unplayable, but for this game, it's worth it. Like I said at the start, Hi-Fi Rush isn't really my sort of go-to game, and I honestly didn't expect to like it as much as I did, but goddamn is this game good. It hits it out of the park in pretty much every facet, and there really isn't an awful lot of bad things to say about it. It's smart, it's enjoyable, and it's a game that there's little hesitation in playing through multiple times. In fact, it would feel wrong not to. But even selling well over 2 million copies and boasting a deserved overwhelmingly positive review score on Steam wasn't enough for Tango Softworks to be spared the ire and greed of Microsoft, barely a year after this game came out, which really just kinda dampens your faith in humanity a little, doesn't it? It makes it hard for me to recommend buying it because the people that actually made the game won't see any of the benefit, although let's be honest, the game sale money would still be all going to the greedy corpo fucks at Microsoft anyway, just like their previous wages are now. But it's not all doom and gloom, as Tango Gameworks are back. Sorta, with around a third of their original staff coming back after being reacquired by Krafton, which is the, it's the PUBG people. Oh shit. And they've managed to retain the rights to the Hi-Fi Rush IP, meaning that a sequel may well and truly be on the cards at some stage. And if it goes anywhere near as hard as the original, then it's definitely one to keep an eye out for. I wholeheartedly recommend buying Hi-Fi Rush to honor the people that made it, because there are still people out there with passion and love for video games and the people that played them. Otherwise, games like this wouldn't exist. Plus, it's a good-ass game, so if anything, just play it because it's fucking sick. So here's to hoping that not only does Microsoft totally collapse as a company, but also that we do get Hi-Fi Rush 2 at some point in the future. Because with a show as good as this, it'd be a real shame not to have an encore.